It's almost like the Indiana Fever can't catch a break 1 second. They're patching up injuries like a tree as unit on the front lines the next second. They're watching their star players get assaulted on the court only to have a referees twist the knife by blaming them for it. And the face of this latest outrage, Legs. The whole bloody battered and demanding justice after taking a vicious elbow to the face from Killing McBride and somehow getting whistled the found herself. If you're here for the real story and not to filter version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe, yeah. Yes, you heard that right, Lexie Hull get rocked face fans gas. The arena is buzzing in shock, and when the whistle blows, it's on her. That moment and just cost Indiana momentum in a crucial game. They live fire under every single person who's watched a Fever claw their way through this nightmare season. Because now it's not just about injuries or bad luck now. It feels like Indiana's play against two opponents every night. The team across from them and refs standing in stripes. And you know what? This isn't just one bad call. This isn't just one missed whistle. This is a combination of weeks, no months of inconsistent officiating, tone-deaf decisions, and a complete lack of accountability and Fever. They're the ones paying the price. Let's set the stage. The Fever are barely hanging on to the 8th seed, barely, with Caitlin Clark sidelined Sophie Cunningham of the season. Chloe Baby Sydney calls in an ear, and all banged up. The roster looks less like a professional team and more like a patchwork quilt of emergency hardship signings. Odyssey Sam's aerial powers, Shea Petty players who weren't even supposed to be here suddenly thrust into major roles because he is. Injury list has grown longer than the playbook, and yet somehow this team has fought. Kelsey Mitchell has been electric. Score like her life depends on it. Lexie Hull, who is to be a role player, has turned into the heartbeat of roster. Throw yourself into every possession. Play with an intensity that makes fans that have straighter in their seats. They've been scrappy, resilient, defiant in the face of impossible odds. But then comes the moment in Minnesota. Kale McBride frozen elbow, a vicious one. Lexie crumbles. Fans are outraged. The Fever bench explodes. And when a whistle finally blows, it's not on McBride, it's on Lexie. You could hear the collective groan echoing across the league, not just because it was unfair, but because he confirmed every fan's worst fear that Indiana isn't just unlucky, they're being actively disrespected. Head coach Stephanie White said it as plainly as she could. The physicality is one thing. This is basketball. After all, players get it. Players play through pain. But the inconsistency, the way calls seem to bend depending on who's wearing in jersey, that's what she called out. Because when a team already down 5 starters can't even trust the ref to keep the game fair, what chance do they have? And let's be real, this wasn't just about one call. It was about what that call symbolized. Lexie Hull, already carrying absurd low for this depleted Fever squad, gets punished for being assaulted. It was insult on top of injury, frustration on top of exhaustion. And it showed in her eyes and her words in her post-game demeanor. Lexie Hull didn't just one foul, she wanted justice. And that's the part that fans can let go of, because this Fever team isn't perfect. They're short-handed, they're shaky. They're surviving on grit more than strategy at this point. But what they deserve is fairness, what they deserve is consistency, and what they got instead was a slap in the face, both literally and metaphorically. But let's zoom out. There's a fishing fiasco doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a larger narrative, a season defined by injuries, chaos, and questions about the WNBA commitment to protecting his players. Caitlin Clark, the league's most valuable marketing weapon, sidelined by a groin injury. Sophie Cunningham, taken out by a reckless play. Her family publicly calling out the league's lack of accountability. Now Lexie Hull eating an elbow and being told it's her fault. At some point you have to ask what's really going on here. Is just incompetence, or is it buys a Fever really that unlucky, already being targeted by sloppy officiating that never seems to swing in their favor? Fans are starting to believe the latter, and the loud or those whispers yet the more dangerous have become for the league's credibility. Because let's face it, if fans don't believe the refs are fair, why would they keep watching? If players don't believe the league protects them, why would they put their bodies on the line? Officiating isn't just about whistles, it's about trust, and right now that trust is crumbling. Now here's where the drama show sharpens even further. The Fever clinging to the playoff by their fingertips. Every game matters, every possession matters, and the difference between getting that 8th seed or collapsing into irrelevance could come down to a single call. So when Lexie Hull gets flagged for being on the receiving end of a violent elbow, is not just about that Momo. It is about the ripple effect, that possession, that momentum swing could be the difference between postseason basketball and going home early. And let's not pretend this team can just shrug it off. They've already been running on fumes with Kelsey Me to play like a one-woman army. And Hull doing everything, sure, strapping on goalie pad stick. Cover all 5 positions. The hardship signings are trying, but chemistry doesn't build overnight. The rotations are a mess. The offense is patchwork, and the defense is porous. This team is bleeding out, and instead of being given a fair shot to fight, they're being asked to do it while handcuffed. The anticipation around Caitlin Clark's return is the only light at the end of the tunnel. Fans are desperate for her to come back, not just because of her scoring, but because of her orchestration. She's the glue, the floor general, the conductor who makes the whole thing work. Without her, the feel a disjointed every possession feeling like struggle. With her, there's hope, there's balance, there's purpose. But even Clark's return won't solve the bigger issue. The perception of bias, the uneven officiating, the feeling that Indiana's always swimming upstream. Until that changes, this team's ceiling is kept. And that's not as bad fever, it's bad for the league, because whether you love or hate her, Caitlin Clark is a WNBA ticket to relevance. Fans aren't tuning in for the refs, they're tuning in for stars. And if those stars keep getting elbowed, injured, and ignored, eventually fans will tune out altogether. Let's give credit where it's due. The Lexie Hull and Kelsey Mitchell have shown the car of toughness that deserve respect. Mitchell has been relentless, score like it or last chance every night. Hull has been embodiment of resilience, stepping into role she never asked for, fighting through pain, and still producing. These to have kept the fever live when everything else screamed collapse. Their effort is only reason this team is still breathing. But effort isn't enough now, and the deck is stacked. Not when injuries, officiating, and a brutal schedule all collide. Indiana's story this year is when triumph. It's one of survival against injuries, survival against bias, survival against very system that's supposed to protect them. And that's why Lexie Hull's demand for justice resonates so loudly. It's not just about one elbow. It's about everything this team has endured. It's about the exhaustion of fighting by battles on every front. It's about the sheer unfairness of giving everything you have only to have the rules been against you. So what happens next? Does league finally acknowledge the issue and tighten up officiating standards? Does a fever keep scraping incline, hoping Clark returns enough to steady the ship? Or do they collapse and it away? Given all another what if in a season that could have been something special. Whatever the outcome, one thing is clear. This team is going quietly. They may be battered, they may be bruised, but they're not backing down. Lexie Hull fire. Prove it. Kelsey Mitchell's heroics prove it. And if Caitlin Clark comes back swinging, the league had better be ready, because this team, this franchise, and these players aren't just asking for justice anymore. They're demanding it, and fans, they're watching closely. So tell me, was that elbow just an accident the ref missed, or was it the smoking gun proven by, as everyone's been whispering about? And how many more of these missed calls can Indiana survive before the whole seas unravels? Because one thing for sure, the fever may be hanging by a thread, but that thread is stronger than anyone expected. And if they go down, they're going down fighting, with Lexie Hull leading the charge. Welcome to the Indiana Fever's 2025 season, where logic is out the window, half the roster's in walking boot, injustice nowhere be found. So picture this, it's a tight game, emotions are running high, and Lexie Hull, who mind you's been play, live your life depends on it, is out there grinding on both ends the floor. She's already covering weight. Much ground thanks to the Fever's injury list, reading like a full starting lineup. And then bam, Kayla McBride swings an elbow so sharp you cut glass with it, straight to the face. Lexie stumbles back, probably seeing stars, but the whistle not on Kayla, no, the refs. In what can only be described as a cosmic joke, slap the foul on Lexie. Yes, seriously, it was a kind of call that makes you sit back and ask, what are we even doing here? And Lexie, she didn't just take it, she demanded justice after the game. Her frustration was crystal clear. Fans are outraged. Twitter was ablaze. Even players from other teams chime in about how off the rails the season has been for Indiana. But that elbow, that was just the exclamation point on a much bigger disaster. Let's rewind before the chaos and conspiracy theories. The Indiana Fever came into the season with big expect Patience with Caitlin Clark in the spotlight. The Fever were finally supposed to break out of years-long mediocrity swamp and make a real playoff push. Had young talent, they had momentum, they had the hype. The injury bug showed up and didn't leave. One by one, the roster crumbled. Caitlin Clark went down, Sophie Cunningham followed, Chloe Baby injured, Sydney Colson out, Erie McDonald sidelined. At a certain point, it was like watching a horror movie. We know who's next, but you can't stop it. By mid-season, the Fever weren't playing with a team, they were playing with whoever says we'll have functioning limbs. Emergency hardship signings road, and like replacements from a sports apocalypse movie. Odyssey Sims, aerial powers shape petty, thrown into the fire with zero prep, barely time to memorize plays, let alone build chemistry, and yet the Fever kept fighting. Kelsey Mitchell turned into a one-woman offense. Lexie Hull, bless her, evolved into a Swiss Army knife, playing defense, scoring when needed, holding the team together with pure adrenaline. And spite the effort was there, the spirit unbreakable. But the WNBA doesn't give up moral victories, and with the roster held together by duct tape, every bad call hit harder, which brings us back to the officiating now. Bad calls happen. It's par sports. But this has become a pattern. Have been so many what was that moments this season for Indiana that fans have started compiling receipts. Questionable, no calls, ticket tech fouls at all. We seem to go one way, physical play that somehow gets ignored when it's against a Fever, but caught immediately when is the other way around. And he elbowed Lexie. How that was the moment it boiled over. She wasn't just physically rocked, she was disrespected, and the team felt it. Head coach Stephanie White tried to keep composed, but you could see the tension in her post-game presser. She's taught all C's. And by the lack of balance, the over-the-top physicality the Fever have had to endure, and how been met with cricket from officials, is not just unfair, it's dangerous. These players are already pushing their bodies the limit, playing 35-plus minutes because the bench is empty, and when refused, protect them, or worse, penalize them to being attacked. That's not just frustrating, that's reckless. What makes it even worth the stakes right now? Indiana is clinging to the 8th like of the last live, as on the Titanic. Every game counts, every possession matters. And when the refs honja the team free points or ignore blindly dirty plays, is not just about that moment, it's about postseason dreams slipping away. Let's be real, this is a team that should be buried by. I now have the WNBA wouldn't be standing after the injury run Indiana's dealt with. But they refuse to fold. They patch together with grit and coffee and miracle rotations, and somehow they're still in the race, and still they're being treated like background characters of Caitlin Clark is the league's ratings queen. The Fever should be getting a little more respect. No, instead they're walking in every game like as a 5-eat-5 players, 3 reps, and a whole lot of buys. Now let's talk about those emergency signings, because it's one thing to fill out a roster, it's another to rebuild one mid-season with players who haven't had a single practice. With the core group, Odyssey Sims has been doing her best quarterback defense, but there's only so much you can do with a system that being rewritten on fly. Aerial powers brings toughness, Shea Petty brings hustle, but cohesion that takes time, and Indiana doesn't have time. What they do have is a whole lot of pressure, all duct tape lineups, and maybe one hope left: the return of Caitlin Clark. When Clark went down, so did Indiana's offensive rhythm. She's not just a shooter, she's a floor general, the architect. Without her, the Fever looks scattered, reactive, and at times just straight up exhausted. Harrod's turn could be the spark they need, but let's be honest, it's a lot too as one player, no matter how iconic. Still the countdown, as on fans are praying, commentators are speculating. The league knows that if Clark comes back in a Fever squeeze into playoff, it'll be a ratings fever dream. But between now and then, the team has to survive, and with every game being a brawl, sometimes literally, they need every ounce of focus, and yeah, maybe a little mercy for the officials. But let's not hold our breath on that one. The Lexie Hull moment wasn't as a bad call, it was a breaking point. The Fever have been polite, they play through pain, they've held their tongues, but now they're calling it out and fans are echoing it louder, because it's not just about one elbow, it's about a season-long pattern that's put a team in survival mode. It's about the league responsibility to players, and it's about whether the WNBA want to be taken seriously as prefer. National League, or keep looking like the referees are freelancing. The sad part, Lexie Hull should be getting flowers. She's played her heart out, defend like a maniac, and stepped up every time someone else went down, but instead of recognition, she got an elbow and a foul cue. Slow claps, so what now? Wow, well, if you're the Indiana Fever, you just keep going because that's what this team does. No matter how many it's a take literal or metaphorical, they keep leasing up, they keep showing up, and fans, they're showing up to because chaos aside, this is a team you want to root for now. Charges just because of the drama, but because of the heart and of the leagues watching. Maybe take notes because of teams can count on fair play. Where we even doing because mess. Oh, there's plenty more where that came from. Just when you think Indiana Fever have reached their limit physically, emotionally, even karmically, they find a new way to keep the script spicy. At this point, the entire franchise or hazard pay and a Netflix Tokyo series title with Survivor W. Yeah, addition, let's talk about morale. You'd think with all the setbacks, the cancer rotating door players, the blown calls, the looming play or pressure, this team would just deflate. But somehow the opposite has happened. There's a stubborn defiant brewing inside the locker room. It's less woe is me and more try me again. Lexie Hull's practically turned into a mythological figure at this point. She's logging massive minutes, taking beatings, defending every position on the court, and do it all without making a scene until now, because sometimes the only way to get hurt is to call it like it is, and it's not just her Kelsey Mitchell. Oh, she's been absolutely unreal game after game. She's dropping bucket with the kind of coolness that makes you forget the chaos swirling around her. If Lexie is a team's engine, Chelsea's a heartbeat, steady, calm, lethal. Every time she nails a clutch jumper is like a middle finger to universe for how unfair this season's been. But even superheroes get tired. There are only so many minutes your stars can carry the load before something gives. And here's where it gets really twisted with all the injuries. The latter consist in officiating raw fatigue. Indiana isn't as fighting their opponents, they're fighting themselves. Chemistry is due delicate, and when half your roster is newcomers, were literally flown and suited up, enters into a live game, cohesion takes a hit. These emergency signings are doing their best. Odyssey seems, bless her, has stepped into a leadership role almost overnight. She didn't have time to ease, and she just had to go. Aerial powers is bringing intensity, sure, but intensity without rhythm is chaos wrapped in effort. And Shea Petty, she's scrappy, determined, and clearly wants to prove she belongs. But when the team is built on hope and hustle instead of structure and strategy, yeah, things get messy. And the worst part, the league isn't cutting them any slack. It's almost like people are forgetting the actual human cost of this whole situation. These are elite athletes running on fumes, getting battered, and still expected to deliver a playoff caliber product. And yet they're being judged by the same standards as fully healthy stack two teams. Take a step back and think about that. The Fever down 5 key players. That's not a bump in a road, that a demolition, but instead of sympathy or even fair treatment, they're getting elbows, the face, and whistles that make you question reality. And if you think that fans haven't noticed, think again. Social media. The meltdown mode since Lexie Hull debacle. Fans have been pulling out slow-mo replays, screen-grabbing receipts, tagging league account, demanding accountability, because it's not just about the Fever anymore, it's about the precedent. If this can happen when the hardest-working, most short-handed teams in the league, who's next? There's something particularly infuriating about watching a team scrape and claw their way through adversity, only to get slapped in the face by the very system that's supposed to protect them. And look, we get it, refs are human, mistakes happen. But when mistakes only seem to happen to one team, yeah, people can talk loudly. Let's stop playoff, because as of now, the Fever still technically and barely, they're clinging to that 8th seed like a lifeline, and every game lived on a schedule feels like a final exam. One misstep, one more injury, while more garbage call, and it could all come crashing down. And that's often the margin. Is the upcoming scheduled brutal road games, back-to-backs, top-tier opponents. It's like the basketball gods are actively trolling them. And yet Indiana can't afford a blank, because slipping out of playoff contention after this kind of season, that would be soul-crushing. But here's where it gets poetic. If Caitlin Clark does return, and if Fever manage to stabilize just enough, they could be the most dangerous 8th seed in recent memory. Think about it. You get arrested, fired up Clark, reunited with a battle-tested Lexie and Kelsey, add in the desperation of a team that been disrespected Counted out and battered all year. That's not just a playoff team, that's a revenge to waiting to happen. And